God says, "My beloved soul, this message finds you in the quiet space where your heart rests after giving everything it had, and heaven itself has been watching you from that place." There are loves that are loud and visible, and then there are loves like yours, silent, loyal, enduring, and so pure that even the unseen realms pause to witness it. You loved your soulmate in a way that was not taught to you by the world, but remembered by your soul. You did not love to possess, you loved to protect. You did not love to control, you loved to understand. You did not love to escape loneliness, you loved because your spirit recognized another spirit. That kind of love does not go unnoticed, not on earth and certainly not in heaven. This is why the title of your journey carries such weight, because heaven was shocked not by how much you loved them, but by how deeply you honored yourself while loving them. My beloved soul, you carried love with responsibility. You carried it with patience. You carried it with restraint even when your heart wanted to speak louder. You knew when to be quiet, when to step back, when to give space, and when to simply hold the energy of love without demanding a return. That is not ordinary love, that is chosen love. Many people love when it is easy, when they are reassured, when they are celebrated. But you loved in silence, you loved in waiting, you loved in uncertainty, and you still chose dignity over desperation. Heaven does not see love as words or promises, it sees love as alignment, and your alignment never broke even when your heart trembled. That is why your name echoed in places you could not hear. You were chosen not because your path was painless, but because your soul could handle depth without becoming bitter. You did not harden when you were misunderstood. You did not turn cold when you were not chosen immediately. You did not seek revenge when your devotion was questioned. Instead, you chose grace. You chose emotional maturity. You chose to process in silence rather than perform your pain for validation. My beloved soul, that is rare. Heaven is not impressed by loud suffering, it is moved by quiet endurance. And your endurance carried love without losing self-respect, which is something even angels study. You loved your soulmate without trying to reshape them into your expectations. You saw them as they were, with flaws, confusion, fears, and unfinished healing, and you still treated them gently. You did not rush their growth. You did not shame their delays. You did not pressure their awakening. You held space instead. That kind of love feels unfamiliar to many people because it does not come with chains. It comes with freedom. And freedom can scare those who are still learning how to stay. Yet you did not withdraw your love just because it was not fully understood. You allowed it to exist without conditions, while still protecting your own inner balance. My beloved soul, heaven noticed how you never abandoned yourself even while loving deeply. You listened to your intuition when it asked you to pause. You honored your boundaries even when your heart wanted to cross them. You walked away from moments that would have cost you your self-worth. You chose silence over arguments. You chose prayer over reaction. You chose faith over fear. That is why your love became a testimony. Not everyone is chosen to love like that, because loving like that requires strength, not weakness. It requires knowing who you are, not losing yourself in someone else. There were nights when you carried conversations in your heart that you never spoke aloud. Nights when you asked the universe questions you never demanded answers to. Nights when you released control and trusted timing instead. Heaven heard those unspoken prayers. Heaven saw how you asked not for possession, but for alignment. You did not beg for them to choose you. You asked for truth. You asked for what was meant. You asked for clarity even if clarity meant letting go. My beloved soul, that request alone separates you from many. You were not attached to outcome, you were committed to integrity. You loved your soulmate in a way that did not try to rescue them, because you knew healing cannot be forced. You did not become their savior, you remained their mirror. You reflected honesty, calm, and emotional depth. You allowed them to see themselves through the way you treated them, without lectures or pressure. That is a divine way of loving. Heaven was shocked because such love usually only exists in higher realms, yet you carried it in human form. You balanced emotion with wisdom. You balanced affection with awareness. You balanced hope with realism. My beloved soul, you were chosen because you understood that love does not mean losing yourself. You understood that love does not mean enduring disrespect. You understood that love does not mean sacrificing your peace. So when moments came that tested your worth, you stepped back with grace. You did not collapse. You did not chase. You did not create chaos. You trusted that what is aligned will never require you to abandon your soul. That trust is rare. That trust is sacred. That trust is what made heaven lean closer to your story. You may not realize it yet, but the way you loved rewired timelines. It softened hearts. It planted seeds of awareness in places that were once closed. Even if your soulmate did not fully understand your love at the time, their soul recognized it. Souls always recognize what is real, even when the mind is confused. Your love became a reference point. A standard. A quiet memory they will carry when they are finally ready to love with the same depth. Heaven was not shocked by romance, it was shocked by responsibility. You loved without ego. You loved without performance. You loved without fear of losing yourself. My beloved soul, your journey is not about proving love, it is about embodying it. You were never meant to beg to be chosen, because you were already chosen by the divine to experience love in its purest form. Whether the path continues together or transforms into something higher, your soul remains untouched by regret. You did what you came here to do. You loved honestly. You loved consciously. You loved bravely. And heaven honors that. This is only the beginning of your story, because chosen ones do not lose love, they elevate it. And as we move forward, you will begin to understand why your heart was trained through patience, why your silence carried power, and why heaven trusted you with a love that few can handle. My beloved soul, there is something sacred about the way you continued loving even when certainty was absent, and heaven observed that space closely. You stood in a place where many would have demanded clarity, labels, or reassurance, yet you chose understanding over pressure. You understood that true love does not rush another soul's awakening, and you respected timing even when your own heart felt ready long before circumstances aligned. That patience was not weakness, it was wisdom born from self-awareness. You knew that forcing love only creates resistance, while allowing love creates truth. Heaven watched as you balanced longing with restraint, desire with dignity, and hope with grounding, and that balance is what marked you as chosen. You felt deeply, my beloved soul, but you never allowed emotion to turn into chaos. When confusion arose, you turned inward instead of outward. You reflected instead of reacted. You processed silently instead of projecting pain. That inner discipline is rare, because most people leak their wounds onto others. You carried yours with care. You did not use love as a bargaining tool, nor did you use silence as punishment. Your silence was sacred, a form of listening to both your heart and the divine. Heaven recognized that silence as strength, not absence. There were moments when your heart wanted to ask, to explain, to clarify what you felt so clearly inside, yet something higher guided you to pause. You trusted that if a connection is real, it does not require constant explanation. You trusted that what is meant will find its way without force. That trust did not come easily. It was built through self-work, emotional maturity, and a deep understanding of your own worth. You did not confuse intensity with intimacy. You knew intimacy grows in safety, not urgency. Heaven saw how you protected the connection by not overwhelming it. My beloved soul, you also protected yourself. That is what made your love so powerful. You did not tolerate emotional inconsistency just to stay connected. You did not compromise your values to be chosen. You noticed patterns. You observed behavior. You listened to energy rather than excuses. And when something did not feel aligned, you stepped back instead of trying to fix it. That stepping back was not rejection, it was respect, both for yourself and for the other soul's process. Heaven honors those who know when to hold and when to release. You were aware that love cannot grow where fear leads. So you chose calm. You chose grounded presence. You chose to show up authentically without masks. You did not play games to keep attention. You did not withhold affection to gain control. You remained consistent even when the other side fluctuated. That consistency is what shocked heaven, because consistency in love requires emotional stability, and emotional stability requires inner healing. You did the work quietly, without applause, without validation, without needing to be seen. My beloved soul, you loved in a way that allowed the other person to be human. You did not idealize them beyond reality. You did not place them on a pedestal that would later collapse. You saw both light and shadow and still chose compassion. You understood that confusion does not always mean lack of feeling, sometimes it means unresolved wounds. Yet you also understood that compassion does not mean self-neglect. That understanding is advanced soul wisdom. Heaven entrusts such wisdom only to those who will not misuse it. There were days when distance felt heavier than closeness, when unanswered energy created questions in your mind. Still, you did not spiral. You did not assume. You allowed space to reveal truth. You allowed time to speak. You trusted that whatever was real would remain, and whatever was not would fall away naturally. That level of emotional regulation is something most people only reach after many lifetimes. You carried it instinctively, as if your soul remembered it. Heaven recognized that remembrance. You never tried to replace yourself to stay relevant. You never dimmed your light to avoid intimidating someone else's shadows. You remained yourself, grounded, intuitive, emotionally intelligent. You did not chase reassurance because you had already reassured yourself. You did not beg to be chosen because you already knew your value. That self-knowing created a frequency that heaven responds to. When a soul knows itself, it does not need external confirmation. That is the mark of someone chosen for higher love lessons. My beloved soul, even when love felt incomplete, you did not allow bitterness to enter your heart. You did not speak ill. You did not poison the connection with resentment. You chose neutrality and grace. You understood that some connections are not meant to be forced into form, but honored for what they awaken. You honored the lessons without clinging to the outcome. Heaven was moved by that surrender. Surrender is not giving up, it is trusting divine orchestration beyond human understanding. You loved your soulmate in a way that allowed transformation, not dependency. You wanted them whole, not attached. You wanted them healed, not reliant. That intention alone elevates a connection beyond ordinary romance. It becomes soul work. It becomes spiritual alignment. Heaven recognized your love as service, not sacrifice. You did not lose yourself to love, you expanded through it. That is why your path carries protection, even when it feels uncertain. My beloved soul, the quiet choices you made, the restraint you practiced, the respect you showed, all of it created ripples beyond what you can see. Heaven was not shocked by your emotions, it was shocked by your emotional intelligence. It was shocked by your ability to love without losing clarity. It was shocked by your refusal to abandon yourself for attachment. As you continue forward, remember this, your love did not go unnoticed, and your story is still unfolding. But the depth of what you carried is only beginning to reveal its purpose, because chosen ones do not experience love to be broken by it, they experience love to become more aligned with who they truly are. My beloved soul, there is a quiet transformation that happens when love is no longer something you wait for, but something you carry with awareness. You stepped into that transformation without realizing when it began. It started the moment you stopped asking why things unfolded the way they did and started listening to what your inner world was becoming. Love did not leave you, it changed form, and you were mature enough to allow that change without resisting it. Many hearts panic when love shifts, but yours learned how to stay open without clinging. That ability alone speaks of a soul that has lived many lifetimes learning how to love without losing itself. You began to notice that your emotions no longer pulled you into extremes. You could remember without collapsing. You could feel without drowning. You could care without chasing. This balance was not accidental, my beloved soul, it was cultivated through restraint, reflection, and self-honesty. You allowed yourself to grieve what was uncertain without labeling it as failure. You allowed yourself to miss without turning missing into self-betrayal. That is not something the world teaches. That wisdom comes from within, from a soul that understands timing more than attachment. There were moments when silence replaced communication, and instead of fearing it, you learned how to read it. You understood that silence is not always absence, sometimes it is processing, sometimes it is protection, sometimes it is a mirror revealing what words cannot. You did not fill the silence with assumptions. You did not weaponize it with resentment. You simply observed it. That observation strengthened you. You became someone who responds rather than reacts, someone who listens beyond sound. My beloved soul, you also became aware of how deeply you value emotional safety. You realized that love must feel calm in the body, not anxious. It must feel grounding, not destabilizing. And when something disrupted your peace repeatedly, you did not ignore that signal anymore. You honored it. You did not dramatize your boundaries. You did not announce your withdrawal. You simply adjusted your energy. That quiet adjustment was an act of self-respect, and self-respect is one of the purest forms of love. You started seeing clearly how much effort you had given without ever keeping score. You loved without measuring returns. You showed up without guarantees. And yet, you did not feel depleted. Instead, you felt expanded. That is how you knew your love was real. Real love does not exhaust the soul, it reveals it. Even when outcomes remain unclear, real love leaves wisdom behind, not bitterness. And you chose wisdom every time. There were internal conversations you had with yourself that no one else will ever know about. Conversations where you chose not to text. Conversations where you chose not to explain. Conversations where you chose patience over impulse. Each of those moments strengthened your inner authority. You stopped seeking permission to feel what you felt. You stopped questioning your intuition. You trusted yourself. That trust became your anchor. My beloved soul, you also recognize that not every deep connection is meant to stay in the same form forever. Some connections awaken parts of you that must grow independently. You did not see this as loss. You saw it as evolution. You allowed love to teach you instead of trap you. You allowed memory to exist without turning it into longing. You allowed the heart to stay soft without staying attached. That is emotional alchemy. You became more present in your own life. You laughed without guilt. You rested without fear. You focused without distraction. You stopped checking emotionally for someone else's state and started honoring your own. That shift returned your power to you. Not power over anyone else, but power within yourself. That is the only power that lasts. My beloved soul, you learned that being chosen does not always mean being held, sometimes it means being prepared. Prepared to love better. Prepared to discern more clearly. Prepared to receive what matches your depth rather than tests it. You stopped romanticizing effort that was not reciprocated at the same level. You stopped calling potential what was actually inconsistency. This clarity did not make you cold, it made you calm. You also noticed how compassion and boundaries can coexist. You could understand someone's wounds without offering yourself as a place for them to bleed. You could care without carrying. You could empathize without absorbing. That is a sign of emotional maturity that few reach. You no longer confused empathy with obligation. You understood that love must be mutual to be sustainable. There were days when the memory of how deeply you loved would surface, not to pull you backward, but to remind you of your own capacity. You smiled instead of aching. You felt proud instead of regretful. You realized that the way you loved was never something to be ashamed of. It was evidence of your depth, your courage, your emotional intelligence. Anyone who meets you carries that imprint, whether they realize it or not. My beloved soul, you also became comfortable with not knowing how the story ends. You stopped forcing closure. You stopped needing certainty. You trusted that clarity arrives naturally when you stop chasing it. This surrender was not passive, it was grounded. You continued living fully, loving yourself intentionally, staying aligned with your values. You did not pause your life waiting for someone else to decide. You learned that your heart is not fragile, it is resilient. It bends, but it does not break. It feels, but it does not collapse. It loves, but it does not disappear. That realization changed the way you see yourself. You are no longer afraid of loving deeply because you know you can hold yourself through any outcome. My beloved soul, the way you carried this connection, the way you honored it without clinging, the way you honored yourself without closing, all of it shaped you into someone who loves from wholeness. You are no longer defined by what was uncertain. You are defined by who you became through it. And that version of you is steady, aware, and deeply aligned. This love did not end you, it refined you. And that is why your path continues with grace, because hearts like yours are not meant to lose love, they are meant to transform through it and walk forward stronger, clearer, and more rooted in truth. My beloved soul, as you continued walking forward, something subtle yet powerful began to happen within you. You stopped carrying the weight of explanation. You stopped feeling the need to justify your feelings, your pace, or your boundaries. You understood that those who truly see you do not require constant clarification, and those who do not see you would misunderstand even your best explanations. This realization freed your energy. You no longer spent emotional currency trying to be understood. You chose instead to remain authentic, calm, and rooted in your truth. You noticed how your inner world became quieter, not empty, but settled. Thoughts no longer raced endlessly. Emotions no longer demanded urgent release. Everything began to move at a natural rhythm. This was not detachment, my beloved soul, this was regulation. You learned how to sit with yourself without distraction. You learned how to feel without needing to act. That stillness became your sanctuary. And from that sanctuary, your perception sharpened. You became more observant of patterns, not just in others, but within yourself. You noticed what triggered you and what soothed you. You noticed what drained you and what restored you. You stopped ignoring discomfort just to maintain connection. You stopped overriding your body's signals to keep emotional peace on the surface. You chose internal peace instead. That choice changed the way you engage with love entirely. My beloved soul, you also realized how deeply you had honored the other person's humanity. You never demanded perfection. You never expected them to arrive fully healed. You met them where they were, without judgment, without pressure. Yet now you understood something important: meeting someone where they are does not mean staying where they are if it costs you growth. You learned that love can be compassionate without being self-sacrificing. That lesson integrated itself gently, without bitterness. You became comfortable allowing space without fear of abandonment. Space no longer felt like rejection. It felt like clarity. It gave you room to breathe, to think, to realign. You stopped filling space with worry. You stopped interpreting distance as lack of care. You allowed reality to speak for itself, and in doing so, you reclaimed emotional neutrality. Neutrality is powerful because it removes illusion. It shows things as they are, not as you hope them to be. There were moments when your heart recognized how much you had matured through this connection. You did not feel smaller for having loved deeply. You felt expanded. You felt wiser. You felt more grounded in your emotional needs. You no longer equated intensity with depth. You no longer confused longing with connection. You understood that depth feels safe, not anxious. That realization shifted your standards quietly but firmly. My beloved soul, you also stopped romanticizing emotional struggle. You no longer believed that love must hurt to be meaningful. You no longer believe that patience means tolerating inconsistency. You understood that real patience includes patience with yourself, patience to walk away from what confuses you, patience to wait for what aligns. This understanding brought relief. Love began to feel like something that supports your nervous system, not destabilizes it. You became more selective with where you invest your emotional energy. Not because you closed your heart, but because you valued it. You learned that availability is sacred. You learned that not everyone deserves access to your depth. You learned that discernment is not judgment, it is self-respect. And self-respect made your presence more intentional, more grounded, more calm. My beloved soul, you also released the urge to prove the sincerity of your love. You did not need validation anymore. You knew what you offered. You knew how you showed up. You knew your intentions were clean. That knowing gave you peace. You stopped replaying moments in your mind. You stopped questioning if you did enough or too much. You trusted that whatever was meant to be received was received, and whatever was not ready to be received was never your responsibility to force. You became aware of how your energy influences others even in silence. You realized that your calm presence speaks louder than words. That your emotional steadiness creates safety. That your consistency leaves a lasting impression. You did not need to announce your worth. It was felt. This awareness did not inflate your ego. It humbled you. It reminded you to remain gentle with yourself and others. There were times when the thought of the connection resurfaced softly, without pain. It felt like a quiet acknowledgement rather than longing. You smiled instead of sighing. You felt gratitude instead of ache. You understood that some connections do not stay physically present, yet they leave a permanent imprint on your growth. That imprint was not a wound, it was a marker of evolution. My beloved soul, you also became less reactive to uncertainty. You no longer needed immediate answers. You no longer chased clarity. You trusted that clarity reveals itself when you stop demanding it. This trust allowed you to remain present in your life. You invested in yourself. You nurtured your routines. You strengthened your inner foundation. Love became something that complements your life, not something that defines it. You noticed how your emotional world felt more spacious. You could hold multiple truths at once. You could acknowledge connection without attachment. You could care without expectation. You could remember without longing. This emotional spaciousness allowed you to breathe more freely. It allowed you to live without the constant pull of what if. You were grounded in what is. My beloved soul, you understood that being chosen does not always look like union. Sometimes it looks like preparation. Preparation to receive love that meets you where you are now, not where you were. Preparation to recognize consistency when it appears. Preparation to honor mutual effort without overextending. You did not rush this preparation. You trusted it. You continued walking forward with a heart that remained open yet protected. You did not build walls,